We try to disqualify ourselves after we fail. We start to think to ourselves, man, maybe I'm not the person that God's called me to be because I failed. I don't think that that was going through Joshua's head, but it definitely goes through our head all the time, right? We start to question who we are. And you know what's funny is because, unassociated has been, the message that this ministry rests on is a message on identity. When we talk about how your past doesn't define you, your mistakes do not define you, your environment does not define you, how people perceive you does not define you, your failures do not define you. And the reason why they don't have to define you is because of the grace of God that He's distributed to you. It's because of the grace of God. When we talk about failures, it's similar to how we talk about our sins. A lot of us, we have those sins of the past that we still, makes us flinch when we talk about them. And the worst part about them is that we had friends back then and we had people around us back then who, to this day, still define us based on the sins that we committed in the past. Just like we have people who were around in those times where you fell on your butt and you failed. And to this day, they define you by your failure. And that's one of the hardest things about failing, and the hardest thing about getting over failure and sin is that there are people around you in those times where you failed and sinned that are going to define you by that failure and by that sin. But what I need you to understand is that there is a truth teller above all types of tellers. There is a being that says the truth when everything else says a lie. There is a being that has the final say, and the reality is that being is Yahweh, that being is God. And He's saying that after you sin and after you fail, you can get back up because of His grace over your life. And you do not have to allow those things to define you. Just like God did not expect the sins of Israel to define the sins of Israel, which is why He sanctified Israel. Just as like He does not think that the sins of your past and the failures of your past should be able to define you. Greater is He in you than he that is in the world. He has overcome the world. Man, I tell you, we serve a God that makes up for our shortcomings. We serve a God that makes up for our failures. Guess what? We serve a God. Yeah, our failures in and of themselves, our sins in and of themselves are terrible. But we serve a God that could even turn those things into better things, into blessings, by somehow using it to mold us into better people. I experienced my own failure, and now I am here today on January 10th, 2022, and I can speak about it. And I can speak to you a message that I believe can edify you, right? Isn't it funny how He can even take the mess ups, the screw ups, and turn them into a blessing? That's when we're talking about the power of God.